You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you. Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech and Future Tech Health podcast, and I have Abdul, Hamid, Halabi. He's the head of healthcare at NVIDIA, NVIDIA. So I think a lot of people have heard of NVIDIA. I didn't realize that they were even into healthcare very much, but we're going to talk about the next-gen imaging technology called Clara. So Abdul, thanks for coming. How are you doing today?
Hey, Richard. Thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be with you on this call.
Oh, good. So tell me about the Clara technology. What's the overall premise of it? And then we'll get into some details of it.
Well, thank you. Clara is our healthcare platform at NVIDIA. A lot of people know NVIDIA from our gaming days. So for those who play games, please keep playing games more and more because these are really important technologies that are being created and being useful for AI. So a little bit of our history and how Clara came about. Back in 1999, roughly, NVIDIA decided to invest in programmable shaders, which allowed the GPUs to become programmable for you to create these amazing games, or maybe to create a movie or simulate a car before you're actually making it so you can be more efficient. That same technology turns out was really useful for also high-performance computing and for scientific computing. So in areas of healthcare like instruments, medical instruments tend to take signal data like X-ray and turn it into an image. That is actually a scientific computing problem which has benefited from GPUs for a very long time. Of course, in 2012, we became the platform for deep learning and AI, and over the last 18 months or so, we invested in other AI technologies like support vector machines and XGBoost with our platform called Rapid. And across these sort of four components from visualization that we introduced in 1999 to scientific computing to deep learning and machine learning, that created our platform that went across many industries for AI. And we decided to go vertical in two of these industries. So one of them was transportation with our effort in self-driving cars, and the other one was healthcare. And the platform that went vertical in healthcare for developers is Clara. So a little bit about Clara. I think what may help before we get in there is to understand where NVIDIA has been in healthcare. And we've been in that space for about 12 years now. It started with the use of GPUs for rendering, so that first vertical I described within our platform. So when you looked at an ultrasound machine and the first time you saw that 3D image of a baby, there was a GPU behind that, or a graphic processor unit. The next time you got into a CT scanner and the scan was much faster, you were exposed to 80% less radiation than usual. That was because GPUs enabled the instrument manufacturers to innovate with algorithms such as iterative reconstruction, which reduced the need for X-ray and still got you the same quality image. And that happened a while ago. And then obviously now with deep learning, there's a lot of use cases. And I think if you combine the use cases in medical from instruments and medical imaging reconstruction to visualization to AI right now, Clara was the platform to help bring all of these technologies as easily as possible to the developers so they can take advantage of them. And we did this by introducing two toolkits. We announced the last one just recently. So one toolkit was targeted at the creation of AI to make it easier to build and manage and deploy AI, and the other one was targeted at instruments in order to enable them with GPU technology for faster reconstruction, for better visualization, and obviously to bring AI.
Okay. So tell me about Clara. Why the focus on improving the imaging? Is it because NVIDIA is really robust in the visual representation using, their graphics cards of games, and now this is going to translate over to medical imaging and improve the resolution of features that you'd image? Or is it something else?
No, absolutely. I think that the power of the graphics processor is in its parallel processing, right? So if you think about gaming and why we did really well in gaming, it's because if we're playing a game really, really fast, you don't want us to be calculating each pixel on your screen in series. You'd want all of these pixels to be calculated at the same time very quickly. So by design, the graphics processor underneath is a parallel processor. And it turns out that a lot of the use cases within the medical imaging world can actually benefit from this parallelism. So that was sort of a natural progression of using the hardware that we have in medical imaging. And it was apparent in the use cases that came out of deep learning first. So a lot of them were focused on radiology and medical imaging.
So what are some of the specific applications where NVIDIA has, improved the resolution of a particular imaging? Is it in X-rays? Is it in CT, MRI? Is it across the board? And, are there any things that have come from the improvement of the imaging? Are you at that stage yet where this is actually deployed in medicine?
Oh, yeah, for sure. So it's really very difficult today to come across a CT scanner, for example, that does not include a GPU in it. In fact, multiple. Same applies on the ultrasound. It's been revolutionized with GPUs, I would say, by moving into software-defined beamforming, MR enabling compressed sensing techniques for faster scanning. X-ray uses it, mammographic imaging uses it. So it's across really the medical imaging industry. There is very high adoption. And now with AI, the adoption is even increasing. So you'll see FDA-approved algorithms such as ACE from Canon, for example, that improve reconstruction for higher quality imaging. You'll see algorithms from GE for AI, using AI for hemorrhage detection, so you can prioritize a work list out of a scanner. You'll see examples from Siemens, for example, where they're automatically measuring anatomy and producing an automatic report using AI, which has GPUs behind it.
So are there any particular images that you've seen or NVIDIA has put forth as an example of the the before and after, or the non-NVIDIA, the non-Clara coupled technology showing improved resolution?
Yeah, so it's sometimes about the resolution, right? And you will see images like this, and some of the most beautiful images you'll see are on cinematic rendering, actually, where it really almost feels that even though you're not inside the body and you're using X-ray to look into the body, it's as if you're looking at it for real. And Siemens is one of the leaders in that space. But I think what GPU computing brings a little bit more than graphics. I think one of the verticals is graphics and higher resolution imaging, and you will see that. I think what we also bring that's really powerful is scientific computing. So the fact that instead of actually acquiring more and more data, so if you think about taking a picture with your phone, in the past you really needed to have this amazing lens, this massive camera, and this crazy technique in order to get a beautiful photograph of anything you're trying to photograph, that tree or cherry blossom. I just came back from Japan. But if you look at the images we're getting with our cell phones today, they're getting really, really close, even though we don't have that hardware and the equipment that we had on the previous images, SLR, cameras. And those are still beautiful, but you're able to almost get very similar images using just your cell phone. And that is possible because we moved the burden of creating the really amazing images from being on the hardware and the specific lenses and all of this stuff into a software problem. So given the data that I can get from this sensor, the camera, or from the X-ray machine, can I actually produce more amazing images? And that happens to be where GPUs are really, really good. So when I talked about moving from, getting the the same CT quality image using 80% less X-ray dosage. That is because we moved the problem from being a hardware problem to becoming software. And now software, we can innovate much faster. So the instrument becomes software defined, just like your phone. Every other day, you're getting much better images out of the phone, even though you're not really upgrading the hardware. And that's the capability that Clara brings. So GPUs enable you to do this software defined development and innovation, and GPUs make it possible inside of the instrument.
Yeah, that's interesting. If you can reduce the radiation someone would experience from a CT, for instance, by up to 80%, I mean, that's tremendous. That would take away a lot of the fear of having to get CTs, in a short period of time if you have an unfortunate condition. And you still get better imagery. I mean, that's fantastic. It's a huge result.
That's true. And what's really cool is, this is being done obviously by our instrument partners utilizing our platform, developer platform. Another great example is MR. So MR is this amazing modality that you could look inside of the brain, inside of the body, and diagnose a lot of disease early, and it does not have you don't have to worry about the X-ray exposure while doing it. The problem with MR is it takes a very long time, and you have to hold your breath. It's challenging for young kids. It's challenging for elderly folks. So you can imagine AI coming through, and we're already seeing examples of this, where we can actually shrink the exam time significantly, so it becomes a useful modality for more and more people, which is something I'm really excited about.
How long is the exam time typically, where you have to lay there and hold your breath multiple times or not move?
So it depends. It could range from anywhere 10 minutes, 15 minutes, all the way up to an hour, depending on the exam that you're taking. But if you're able to shrink this exam, by half, that would be phenomenal, which is some of the results that we've seen from some of the really great startups we're working with.
Is this just for MRI, or is this also for CT or PET scans?
CT tends to be fast anyway. So I think the focus on the CT side has been on dosage reduction. The focus on the MR side has been on reducing the time it takes to get scanned.
Yeah, I mean, I've had some of these scans, and it's very difficult to lay there and not move for 30, 40 minutes, and it's really hard. So all these improvements will make it a much better experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the potential of getting better images is something that we all want to have. Also, the ability to analyze these images more automatically is something that I think AI opens up, which we're really excited about.
Also too, with reduced time to do an MRI, you can cycle it more. If it's at a given clinic and it's being able to be used 8 times a day, if it could be used 12 times a day, the clinic will get a lot more use out of it, and they'll benefit more as well. Yeah,
no, absolutely. We need higher efficiency, and it's especially true when you think of, we tend to be in a great area where we have access to scanners and stuff. But if you look at third world countries and developing countries where these scanners are not as available, they're typically run 24/7, as opposed to the 12 hours a day that we run them here in the United States. There is a massive opportunity on a global scale.
Well, this is enough, but are there any other benefits that you're shooting for? You mentioned the interpretation of the scans. Can you talk a little bit about how that's improving and changing or becoming more automated?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that AI has the potential of obviously improving the imaging, like we talked, but in assisting the radiologist and the technologist in getting higher quality images and getting more information out of the images, I think it's also shown a ton of promise. So one of the things that radiologists and technologists have to do often is quickly triage the list of studies that they have to look at, for example, and then decide which ones they're going to start with. Now that's a task that AI, for example, could help with, prioritizing the list. So if a patient comes in and we think that they have a brain hemorrhage, they're bleeding in their head, you'd want to have the radiologist be alerted to read this study first. So these are some of the use cases we're seeing. Once you've kind of optimized the work list for the radiologist, AI has the promise of also calculating things on their behalf. So extracting information out of the images really quickly, where, for example, you could, if somebody is doing a cardiac study, perhaps you can have the computer look at the cardiac study and automatically calculate the ejection fraction, which is the percentage of blood pumped by the heart on each cycle. So these are things that take time from the radiologist or the technologist, and they really don't need to be doing them. We can actually teach a computer to do them. So we're sort of excited about that use case as well.
I guess you could also do an initial filtering where the AI looks at all the images, and only if certain features show up that should be passed on to a radiologist, for final clarification. That may help as well, a grading or a sorting, and that may make the radiologist work a lot faster too.
It's a massive use case, I think. If you think about this, right, the radiologists on average have about 2 seconds per image in order to diagnose disease, which is a really, really short time. They're worked really hard trying to help the patients around. And if we're able to have them look at the cases that are more difficult earlier in the day or as soon as they come, the quality of the work would go up for both the physician and the patient. So an example is Ohio State University. So Dr. Luciano Proverdello and Dr. Rick White and the team over there produced an algorithm that can detect stroke, hemorrhage, most critical diseases for the head. And using Clara, basically, they were able to deploy it into their workflow immediately. So now every study coming through to Ohio State University gets processed, and the ones which they believe have a high likelihood of a brain injury or a critical case for the brain will go up to the top of the list for the Ohio State University radiologists to read. So these use cases make a lot of sense. They do. Yeah, the challenging part, Richard, is, and where we're really focused is recognizing that there's going to be a lot of these algorithms, right? So use cases, obviously, which improve the workflow, use cases which improve quality, use cases which reduce cost or increase access, all of them, there's going to be a lot of them. In fact, if you did just simple math, there is something like 10 modalities being, X-ray, CT, MR. There is probably 10 organ systems between, cardiovascular and musculoskeletal and brain. Within each one of these 10 organ systems, there is, 10 organs or so. Within each one of these organs, there's 10 diseases that you can diagnose. So you're looking at something on the order of maybe thousands, if not tens of thousands of algorithms that need to be created, that can be created and can benefit the patients, can benefit the hospitals, and can benefit the system overall. So the doctors and the system overall. How do you do that? How do you create thousands and thousands of algorithms? How do you enable physicians to get involved in the process is a challenge that we're thinking about as well. Recognizing that an algorithm that's developed in one hospital may not work actually at a different hospital. So we had an example of this where an algorithm was created at MGH, and the algorithm was basically used to study how healthy your heart is. So it was done on a cardiac CTA, and it was measuring the thickness of the wall of the left ventricle. So it's a useful measure for how healthy your heart is. The algorithm was able to measure the thickness of the heart at over 96% accuracy at MGH. And then as part of our pilot, we decided to take that algorithm and move it to Ohio State University. When we moved it to Ohio State University, the algorithm the accuracy of that algorithm dropped to something like 87%. When we analyzed a little bit, we realized that the patient population at Ohio State University had higher prevalence of high blood pressure than the population at MGH. So as a result, the thickness of the wall of the left ventricle of the wall was actually more at Ohio State University, and the algorithm did not see that at MGH. So when it saw it for the first time at Ohio State University, it didn't know what to do with it. However,
why?
Because it's new. I mean, the bottom line is the algorithms and deep learning, they learn from examples. They learn by seeing things. You show them examples and they learn from those. When they see something new, they don't know how to extrapolate really well, right? The thing is, and a best example of this is self-driving, right? So if you think about a car that is trained to drive phenomenally, right? If I showed it to you hey, would you be willing to get into this car? In general, most people, about 60-70%, will say, yes, I'd like to try the self-driving car. However, if I asked you, how would you go about it if you knew that this car was trained to drive in the UK?
Well, so when you deployed this in the new hospital, did you run through a training set, or did you feel like, oh, you don't need to do that, let's just put it in production?
No, so the typical path is usually you try to put it in production, but I think what we learned is when you bring it to a new hospital, you actually need to do a little bit of retraining. It's called transfer learning. So what we asked Dr. Richard White to do is, would you actually annotate a few of these high blood pressure examples? And they did. And with a fraction of the number of cases that were used to originally train that network. So when you did this and maybe 10% of the cases were re-annotated at Ohio State University, we were actually able to retrain the algorithm and bring it back to the 96% accuracy that was at MGH. So what we learned from this is there is a huge need for localization of the algorithm, right? And if we followed sort of the idea of the self-driving car, which was trained in the UK, that car would be very dangerous in the US. Even though it knows how to really drive, it would drive on the wrong side of the street. So, however, with minor retraining, it still knows how to drive. With minor retraining, you can train it that, hey, you need to start driving on the right side of the street, which is exactly what we need to do with medical imaging. So we need to provide, I think, what Clara AI provided, and we announced a little while ago, is the ability to bring AI to the annotation process so you can create data sets locally, quickly, the ability to train locally once you have a large algorithm created somewhere else, you're able to adapt it for your own patients and your own practice, and then the ability to deploy it quickly in the hospital. So these were three functionalities that we bring with Clara AI.
Well, once you bring it from hospital A to hospital B, and you retrain it a little bit and you run it, have you tried going back to hospital A with it, with the new retrained version, and would that not work? Does the algorithm literally have to go into each setting, be trained, and then it stays there? And then, I guess another way to ask it is, do you get any benefit from having the algorithm be used in multiple settings and then integrating all of that learning into one master algorithm? Or is that not how it works?
Oh, absolutely. I think we're also working on techniques. That's called federated learning in general, where the idea is, let me get as much data from different centers, different populations, different scanners, and use all of this data collectively to create new algorithms. So that's something that's really successful. We're working with King's College London on right now, and a bunch of other universities. Yes, there is a benefit, absolutely.
Interesting. Okay. So, we're getting close to the end of the time. What's the near-term future of the technology over the next year or two? What milestones are you guys looking to achieve?
I think if the most important thing in my mind is to recognize that, everybody sees the promise of AI in medical imaging, where we're able, a world with AI is so much better than a world without AI because we're more efficient, or we're reducing costs, we're increasing quality, reducing error rate, making physicians and their expertise available to everybody around the world, especially in areas which don't have access to such knowledge. I think what's important to recognize is radiologists need to be involved. So at the end of it, what AI is doing is it's translating somebody's knowledge into an application that others can use. And one of our biggest goals is to enable radiologists to create as much of the AI as possible, which is why we created the Clara platform, enabling them to annotate much faster within their own workflow, enabling them to bring algorithms from other institutions and localize them within the hospital while maintaining their data inside of the hospital, enabling them to deploy really quickly. And I think if we can keep going down that path, we can imagine a flourishing ecosystem of AI development. So we partnered with the American College of Radiology. Just last Monday, we announced our partnership. We've been working together for over a year in order to bring this technology through their member network to every hospital. So I really look forward to making this technology as robust as possible and making it available to all of our partners, from physicians to the vendor community to the startup community, to keep AI going.
Okay. Well, very good. Abdul, so what's the best way for people to find out more about NVIDIA in general and then the Clara technology platform?
head to NVIDIA.com and look at the Clara platform and their platforms.
Very good. Okay. Well, Abdul, thanks for coming on the podcast. And just like the technology yourself, I think you made it very clear and understandable to see what it's doing. So thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Richard, for your time.
You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you.